Today's conversation is sponsored by First Generation Capital Partners. If you're an accredited investor and you want to find out more about investment opportunities, go to firstgencp.com/invest.
It's a matter of like you having the confidence and knowing that, okay, with real estate, like there's no, as you had said earlier, Billy, there's no right way. It's just a matter of you kind of doing it.
You're listening to the Going Long podcast with Billy Keels, the #1 podcast for long-distance real asset investing.
Welcome to the Going Long podcast. We're back once again to continue to help to educate you so you feel much more comfortable as well as confident investing beyond your backyard. And yes, I am your host, Billy Keels, and I am so looking forward to welcome you back to another conversation. We're going to jump right into it. Things are going to be cool. Get your pen, get your paper out, and be ready to take some notes because today's conversation is a great one. So, you know what? We continue to move up the charts. Thank you very much. And I want to just say thanks once again, like I mentioned before, and so many of you have taken the time to leave an honest written review as well as a rating. If you have not done that, especially on the Apple Podcast platform, take just a couple seconds. Let us know what you like, what you like to see change. It would be absolutely phenomenal. So, and you'll continue to help us attract more guests, better guests to get you what you need. Secondly, if you want to find out all of the previous episodes, go to billykeels.com. When you get there, you're going to see the screen change a little bit. Go to the podcast tab. You can see every one of the 200 plus episodes that we've ever done, video version, audio version. It will be awesome. And then lastly, if you are an accredited investor, and by now you should know what that is, we're letting you know. If you want to find out more, especially if you are getting crushed by your W-2 wages, you probably want to join this. Well, not probably. Yeah, you want to connect with me and the rest of the other accredited investors. Send me an email, aiclub@billykeels.com. Once again, that's aiclub@billykeels.com. And then for today's conversation, we're going to talk to someone who is a teacher in the education system, grew up in a multicultural family, has had lots of travel experience, life experience, focused on mindset, and is extremely, extremely vulnerable. Share some things with us today that are going to also help you to move forward faster. In just a couple seconds, we're going to get to our conversation with Karoline Kaon, and we'll get to that just after this. Are you a busy, high-paid professional, someone who's made $200,000 the previous 2 years and also expected to earn $200,000 this year? Or maybe as a couple, you filed jointly and you've earned $300,000 the previous 2 years and also expected to earn $300,000 together this year. Or maybe yourself or as a couple, you have $1 million in net worth, not including your home. Well, if you meet any of those criteria, then the IRS considers you to be someone who is an accredited investor. And so that probably means you're a top producing software sales executive, or maybe you're a highly paid consultant. Maybe you're a lawyer, maybe you're a doctor or a business owner. You may even work for a professional sports franchise. Well, one way or the other, you've done a lot of really hard work to get to where you are. You've done 100% of the work, and nowadays you're continuing to get crushed by taxes. And that means you're only bringing home 50% of the reward. If you're tired of doing this over and over and you're looking for a solution to start to keep more of your money, you can go to firstgencp.com/invest so that you can start to keep more of your money, which means that you can start to have the freedom to choose what you want to do, when you want to do it, with whom you want to do it. So once again, go to firstgencp.com/invest to see how we can start to help you today. Once again, that's firstgencp.com/invest. If you want to know how to go about buying your very first investment property to get you started in your long distance investing journey of success, then guess what? Today's a conversation you're really going to want to listen to until the very last word, I promise. You know why? Because today's guest not only had her beginnings working with children and also has a very, very strong passion for intercultural communication. She also continued by doing this in college and doing this in a very active way and continuing these exchanges. She's even a Fulbright fellow with experience living in China as well as Taiwan. That sounds awesome. She's also currently working for the Department of Education. She'll maybe tell us a little bit more about that. And she is the host of the super popular First Deal Show. Gives me great pleasure to welcome to today's conversation, Karoline Kaon. Welcome to the show, Karoline.
Hi, Billy. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. I love our pre-conversation, like very, very cool. I know you've got lots that you're going to be sharing with everybody. And I didn't want to really tell everybody where you lived, because if I would have done that, I would have ruined the very first question, which is no fun. And I'm going to ask you 5 questions, Karoline. You're going to get 2 in the beginning. You're going to get 3 in the end. You're actually going to get more than 5 questions. I just don't know what the other questions are in the middle. So as long as you're okay, I'd like to go ahead and get started with today's conversation.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, very cool. So listen, help us understand, where is it that you live in the US?
Yeah. So I was not born in the United States. I was born in Brazil. And then my family immigrated to the US and they actually landed in New York City. And I grew up in Queens. I'm a Queens girl. So a lot of people think I've never been to Queens. I don't know what that is. It's one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. And if you landed in LaGuardia or JFK, then your feet have touched Queens. So.
There you go. All right. Fantastic. So love that international story just from the very beginning. Love that. Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that. In part of that city that's so nice that they named it twice. So aside from that, aside from helping us understand where you live, could you let me and the Going Long family know what's the most positive thing that's happened to you in the last 24 hours?
So I'm just like you, Billy, I love to take negative or experiences that people might keep them down or upset and turn it into something positive. Like, what can I take away from this? So I actually had a situation at work where, I got into some trouble. Yes, teachers, we also get sent to the principal's office. And, I was initially very upset with the situation. And so I thought about it and I'm like, what am I supposed to take away from this? And it taught me that I need to be more efficient with my time. So as someone who is a teacher and also a real estate investor and have a podcast and I have 2 young kids, all of these things kind of consume my time. And I just need to be more efficient with allocating time at work to just be about work. Because it was kind of commingling with like my side businesses and all that other stuff. And so it was a painful but positive experience because now I'm like, okay, what are all the things I need to get done? And I kind of just focus on that instead of getting sloppy.
When you focus on I love the question that you just said, like, what am I supposed to take away from this experience, right? Because that is where you start to really take your game to the next level. And I mean, just in terms of personal growth, and I don't normally do this, but I'm going to share this now, but because I went through something very similar because I was working in a corporate role. And when you start to blend the lines between one thing to the next, it gets really, really messy. You also end up really exhausted. So when you can have those really, really defined lines, like now I'm in this space or now I'm in the other space, although it seems really, really compartmentalized, it helps your productivity and focus. It's amazing. You are going to see amazing results as you've now continued to move forward from that. So appreciate your vulnerability and sharing that with us, and also helping everybody know that you can turn the positive into anything. The positive can come from anything, even when you get sent to the principal's office. So, so one of the things that the Going Long family knows is, and I do this every week because I like to keep the bar very, very high. And the thing is I try to do that by telling your entire backstory in 1.5 seconds. That's not possible. You've done way too much. You've impacted too many lives. And so, but I tried anyway. And so I think every guest so far has forgiven me for trying to do something that's impossible, like tell your entire backstory. And everybody always helps me. So hopefully, 1, you'll forgive me, and 2, that you will also help me, because it was coming from a very good place. But here's the thing. I would love for you to share with the Going Long family your own backstory in your own words. And also, if you could help us understand, what are some of the major decisions that you've made to this point in your journey, Karoline? And then we'll see where you and I take the conversation from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the space and the opportunity to kind of share with the Going Long family a little bit of my tiny little story. So I am a person who has always been very clear in what I wanted in life. So when I was a kid, because I grew up speaking a lot of, in my household, my parents spoke Portuguese, but my dad is of Asian descent. So I learned Chinese and I was around Japanese and Taiwanese. And so very diverse background and kind of opposing cultures, if you will, all in the same household. So that's kind of what led me, further along in my life. I studied Chinese. I also studied Korean. And it was very intentional. I wanted to be a Korean studies major and do Fulbright in Korea. And then things just didn't pan out that way because that's how life is. So there were some circumstances where I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandfather was a very big influence on me, but he didn't speak English. So he also spoke very little Portuguese. All he knew was like caro, expensive, and cheap was like all he knew. Right. So then I actually focused and studied a lot more Chinese. And, so basically I studied these languages, and then I got married very young. And because I got married very young, I, needed to be with someone who was very flexible with my schedule, because I wanted to have this whole life living abroad in Asia. And so I did that for 2 years. And then I came back to the United States, and I was like, okay, what's next? And that's when I got into the FIRE movement, like financial independence, retire early. And I'm like, great, this is awesome. Like, this is what I want to do. I want to have this flexible life where I don't need to work forever. And through that movement, I was like, I'm working at this tech company that I wasn't an engineer, so I didn't get paid as well as, my colleagues. I'm like, I can't do this forever. I was literally getting paid like $12 an hour. It was a temp position. It was good. Like, I was very efficient at my job. Right. And that whole idea of like doing that work and being focused got me to blast through anything I had to do. So I got promoted. My coworkers didn't really like that. And I'm like, what am I going to do now? So I was doing a lot of self-development, and I read Robert Kiyosaki's book, and that I was hooked. Okay, I need to buy assets. So in 2016 to 2017 was like my year of growth and development in real estate. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. Like, I'm going to buy 3 properties. And so I got my first one. And from that experience, it was essentially a house hack. Like, I lived in the property, and then I ended up fixing up the rest with my, So basically did that. And then I'm like, okay, actually, I want to go back to school and get back into education. And I think part of that journey, I realized that like I didn't have the self-confidence because I wasn't surrounded around with other investors. And I also was not the type of person that I am today. So that key component that I encourage everyone to get into, which is networking, I was very, very afraid. And I think I still had a lot of work I needed to do on myself before I would get to the point where I am now of like being very open and vulnerable and willing to share, because I was super insecure about like, I don't know, like, oh, I just have this one little property and like these people are flipping 100 houses. So I felt intimidated, right? Like it was hard. And so what did I do? I switched. I was like, this is not for me. Like, I'm scared. And then I actually tried to buy a property in upstate New York, and there was some issues. There was like flooding, and they turned the pipes on, and I was just like, I don't know if I can handle this. And so I shied away. Like, I stayed away from real estate probably for like 3 years. And there was a flipper that I knew in Florida, and I love her dearly because she's like now one of my mentors. And basically I kept in touch with her, and then she was very encouraging, and that's how I got back into real estate. So she helped me to buy my next property long distance, which I think is what your audience is all about, right? So that's in a nutshell, right? My whole kind of story is that I got back into it because I still knew someone and still had that connection to it. And it's one of those things where I left it, but I never lost interest. I just, because of my own personal insecurities, I didn't, I shied away.
Yeah. So you shied away from it, but I mean, you've got a number of things that were going on, right? And just from life and having real life happen. You talked about the involvement with, or at least you're having interactions is probably a better word to use. Interactions with the grandparents and being in a household that had lots of different juxtaposing cultures, languages, and also being able to find the right synergies between all of these different things. You tried things like you wanted to go and learn Korean and live there. And if I understood that correctly, and that didn't actually pan out, but that didn't keep you from actually going and living overseas or getting that experience. So you pivoted a bit there. I'm interested to find out more about that. You talked about things like the FIRE movement, which it's really interesting because That's one of the things that I always feel like I've been writing about this recently on LinkedIn as well, but it's like and part of it is I don't understand the movement all together. But one of the things that you said is being able to retire early. And I guess one of the concepts that I continue to think about, because I've recently no longer working in a corporate world, but it's how do you create the lifestyle that you never want to feel like you retire from? Because if you're doing something that you love, then why retire? Right. And that's where I guess I'm a little bit in that mindset today. And because it's something that's a lot on my heart and I find myself writing about it and talking about it, and you just mentioned it, I was like, oh yeah, right, let me just say that. But the one thing that I do want to come back, because I know that the Going Long family would want to understand more about this, is you talked about like getting in real estate. You had some negative things that happened to you. You had some imposter syndrome going on because you were seeing that these people were doing a whole bunch of other stuff. But I wasn't really clear like why you even started in real estate. Like, what was it that even attracted you to real estate?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so to be completely honest with you, my grandfather's last name is Gong in Chinese, and that means palace. Okay. And so when he lived in China before the revolution, the war, he owned land, like he was a nationalist. So they had land from like one mountainside to the other mountainside, right? And so I don't know. I feel like it was in me, like it's in my blood almost, that like, they owned a lot of land. So I'm like, I want to own land too or something. But okay, that's not it. It's my mom. She owns some property in Brazil. And so I think like, seeing that there's opportunity there. No, but really it's the fire thing. So like with fire, right? Because, okay, in order for you to retire, that whole fire movement comes from this idea that you will save up or put basically a lot of your savings into a 401k and index funds. So because my income was not high enough to be able to do that, I'm like, I need another strategy. And so real estate was like, okay, I can actually own the asset. Like I'll own this property, right? I've seen it kind of in my family a little bit. And because I can own this asset, like even if it loses some value, like I still have this thing to back it up, right? To back up the cash that I'm putting into it. And I don't know. I like just was naturally attracted to it.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times that can happen, Karoline, because there are, like for instance, I had no exposure to real estate at all. So it was very new for me, but talking to lots of people, and that's the beauty of it, right? Because there is no one formula. There is no right formula. Everybody starts at a different place. You've had the good fortune of having it in your family. So maybe it wasn't something that you literally were thinking about right away, but because you've had that experience, you've had that exposure, it's somewhat of a natural pivot that you at least say, hey, listen, I know that I can talk to grandpa about this, or I can talk to mom about this because they have experience. Like I can pivot and talk to anybody about that because I had nobody in my network that I knew of that actually was speaking about it. And it's great for the Going Long family to hear because everybody's story is different. You've had it in your family, and although you weren't doing it directly, indirectly, well, you know what? You thought, hey, listen, you heard about this fire movement. This seems like one of the things that you can do. You knew about being able to attain an asset and having that asset work for you. And so look, it seemed like a pivot to you. So appreciate you sharing that. Really hope you're enjoying today's conversation. And once again, if you're an accredited investor and you are tired of getting crushed by your W-2 taxes and you're looking for a new way to gain more control over your freedom to choose, go to firstgencp.com/invest. Once again, that's firstgencp.com/invest. Now let's get back to today's conversation. One of the other things that you also mentioned, you kind of just threw it under there like really fast, right? You were like, you long distance and this is the whole thing. But did you say that your property was in Florida and you're now not living in Florida? Because I think you heard us tell you that you're in Queens. So like you are today living that whole long distance lifestyle. So and the reason that we talk about this on this program, on this show, right, is everything that I learned, or most of the books that I was reading or the podcasts that I was listening to in the very beginning, they were talking about, hey, listen, be a landlord, live down the street, do that. And I fundamentally do not believe that that is the only way that you can gain your freedom to choose what you want to do. Because I've been living in Europe for the last 21 years and I've invested exclusively in assets that are in the United States for the last 10. I know that that's not the norm for most people. I know that what you're doing is not the norm for most people. And I would love for you to share with others why you continue to believe that that is one of the ways that you can continue to get closer to your freedom, your personal freedom objective.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point that you bring up, because even some of the clients that I'm working with today talk to me about how like they're nervous about investing outside of the state or outside of the neighborhood from where they live. And the reality is, because of technology, it has facilitated our lives so much. And I think, I'm not to sound like crass or rude, but I'm a little bit younger. I grew up with Google. So like Google domain, everything Google, I understand. And I think some people who are a little bit older that didn't necessarily have that tech readily available are a little bit hesitant, right? Because they can't see it. It's just like this digital thing. And I'm at the age now where I'm uncomfortable with like this digital real estate, right? Like I don't know TikTok and all those other things and virtual reality, but it's funny how as you get older and there's new technology, it's like always going to be a little resistance, right? Until we're forced to just adapt. So in regards to real estate investing, my second property that I purchased was in 2018. It was a small townhouse and I did it all remotely. Like we closed remotely. There's a mobile notary that came and like I had to sign all this paperwork and, I did the loan. We talked on the phone to like get financing. It was just interesting and a different experience, right? Because before everything was in person, like I went to the property, I saw it, and this was more of building out a team to have the people there that, okay, like they're going to check all this stuff out and I trust them, and they facilitated the whole transaction. And I think that they are a key component in that whole thing. But like, it's not the only way. And that's why on, my podcast, I bring people on that have done different types of first deals, right? And I think it's important for people to understand that you don't have to buy a property yourself. Like you could be a limited partner in a syndication, and that's still another way to get into real estate without actually having to do any of the management, right? Because some people like what they're doing, they love their job, and it's not exactly the avenue that they want to go down of like, oh, I have to find a property manager and talk to an agent and build a whole team. Like, I just kind of want to park my money somewhere, and that's okay. And I think that's why it's important, right? Like you have this show and I have my show to expose people to the different opportunities out there. Because I think we see, bigger pockets or like people online just posting like, oh yeah, I flipped this house, or, I did X, Y, and Z. And in New York City, the prices of homes are like, over $800,000 plus. Like even in Queens, like the prices are insane. It's ridiculous how expensive it's gotten. And for people that don't know, New York City is one of the few places where they have something called a cooperative, which is basically you're buying shares of the asset, right? So like you don't actually own the apartment you live in, you own shares to the company. And that's the only way that they can make it affordable here locally. But it's not something that I would recommend or suggest people to get into just because there's some risk, right? Like there are boards and personalities. But anyways, the whole point being that like, yeah, I knew the Florida market a little bit better. And so that's why I was comfortable just going down there. But there are other surrounding markets. It's a matter of like you having the confidence and knowing that, okay, with real estate, like there's no, as you had said earlier, Billy, there's no right way. It's just a matter of you kind of doing it. I mean, and working with someone can help, right? Like when I got my second property, I had a mentor and she kind of guided me through the whole process. And so I think that's a key component. And that's why I'm kind of going into that space of like helping other people, because it's scary to do it by yourself and then not have the answers or someone to kind of guide you or direct you. Like, this is how you look for a market, or this is how you find the right agent or the lender. And these are the different types of loan products. So when you had, so I appreciate you taking us through that, helping us understand that it is, the property was in Florida. It sounds like you went through a very clear process with someone that was there with you, someone that was mentoring you, guiding you through this process, right? But I guess my question for you also would be, was that something that was in your mind before you started working with somebody else to actually invest beyond your backyard, like literally to go thousands of miles away from where you live? No. I don't think.
Well, yeah. And so the whole point is which is right, because that's what happened to you, right? And so what a lot of times happens is it is about your knowledge, it is about your exposure, and it is about your access. Because had you not had the knowledge, had you not been exposed to this new person that you were talking about, had they not then helped to educate you on what it takes, you talked about some things which are key, absolutely critical when you are in long distance investing, is having a team, a competent team that understands the location. They understand what you as the investor are looking to, what benefit you're looking to get out of. So then they can help you to make give you access to the right opportunities for you, right? There is no, and I say it ad nauseum, there's no one way. Like, there are multiple ways to get to whatever your personal freedom is. And whether that means you're buying small multifamily, you're buying large pieces of energy equipment, you're buying whatever, it all is very, very personalized, because everybody's freedom number, or their whatever they feel freedom is, financial, geographic, whatever, that's very, very, very specific. And so you need to feel comfortable with whatever decision that you're making so that you get closer to whatever that end goal is. So one other question that I was thinking about when you said this was, you've had a number of different experiences, right? And you are helping others also along in this journey. And I'm just curious, because you're working in education, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious from your perspective, if you think about the things that you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and when you are in your block of time, when you're focused just on education and what you're doing there, right? Because that's one of the things we talked about earlier. What are some of the things that you're doing during your job during the day that also you are recognizing are helping you to become a better investor, whether you're doing that actively or you're doing that passively, potentially with somebody else?
Education. I mean, education in and of itself, right? Like, to give you an example, so I'm really big in real estate to the point where my students now actively invest in real estate. So in my class, we have classroom economy, and my kids all get a salary, and their salary is actually less than their rent. So rent is like $1,000, and I pay them salaries between $500 to $900. Just depends on what their job is and how demanding it is in the classroom. And so I have some students who've actually been very open and like the idea that they've become their own mini entrepreneurs in the classroom. And so to kind of relay that back to real estate, I think once you have exposure and someone is showing you what your options are, then it's up to you to kind of get creative in how you want to go on this journey, right? Because I started out in the single family space, but to be very honest, like if I could go back in time, I would have started in the multifamily space, because that's really where I wanted to be. But I didn't have the right education at the time, or even the thought to like make such a big investment in myself, right? Because as you go along in your personal development journey, a lot of it is about investing in you. It's not so much like, because that's the best investment, right? Like someone could take away everything that I have, but whatever's up here in my mind, like there's no access, right? I could do everything that I've already done again because I have that knowledge now, because you don't know what you don't know. So with my students, I just want to point out, I have this one student who his name is Marcus, and wow, this kid is going to be like a future, I don't know, businessman, like insane. So in the classroom, right, he somehow was able to demonstrate to other kids the value that he provides to them. And what do I mean by this? So one day he comes up to me, he's like, look, Miss KK, look what Kingston gave me. And he shows me a $50 bill. And I said, what? And he's like, yeah, Miss KK. So basically I've been selling your money and kids have been giving me money for it. So the kids in my class believe that my Miss KK's classroom economy money is worth more than actual physical US dollars, right? So it's brilliant in that he's showing these kids like this is worth something, and they are willing to exchange actual money to him for that. And then he created his own store, and like he's working out these dealings, and I will say that I kind of dropped the hat a little bit and I want to go to this digital economy thing. And he was very upset because there are some people that owe him money. And it's just like this whole triangle of like, people owing other people.
Well, but you know what? But it's really, really interesting, right? So, and you use that as an example, but so what you're able to do in your 9 to 5 is you're using gamification, right? To be able to help educate others on concepts, and you're getting a lesson yourself to say, okay, well, listen, and it's no different than what the Federal Reserve does is basically, and what happens is we print and print and print and print and print a whole bunch of money, but because everyone says, it could be the Fed or the European Central Bank, whoever, but we're printing all this money, and the only reason that any of this money or debt is worth something is because we put value on it. So when you have your kids in your class that put more value on something else, they've come up collectively and said, Miss KK's pieces of paper are worth more than anything else. But it's because they place the value on it. I mean, personally, there's a huge lesson there because and also there's another one that's probably a bit scarier that most people may not like, but I'm going to say it anyway, is you decide you want to change the game. And so those pieces of paper are no longer good because you're going to go to a different platform. That could happen in real life, right? And then what happens when the pieces of paper that today we call currency are no longer really the most valid thing tomorrow? I don't know. You can tell us how things end up in your class and we can prepare the rest of the 8 billion people on earth as to what could potentially happen there. We won't go any further than that. One last question before we get into the going along final 3. Just curious, just because I've been writing about this a lot on LinkedIn lately and watching people and asking, and this whole concept of freedom keeps coming up. And I know we talked about it earlier, but just what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom means the time and location freedom. Like I lived in Asia for 2 years, but to be very frank and honest with you, I want to be a digital nomad. Like I want to live and spend some time in Brazil. Like so I visited to Europe when I was in high school, and like it really opened my eyes to, wow, like there are these other places and they live differently, and I can just spend time here and study their languages. And that's just something that for me is, it's key. Like and even with my kids, like I want them to have that exposure to other cultures and other languages, because that's the best way to understand people, right? And human psychology and how we think. It's not limited to just the United States.
I absolutely can't agree with you more. I mean, having lived outside the United States for the last 21 years, learned 4 additional languages, it goes beyond the languages. It is really about the cultural understanding, right? And I mean, today I speak Spanish. I understand Spanish. It's very European Spanish, so I understand the language and the culture. However, when I go to Latin America, there are cultural contexts that I don't have, even though I have the language. And so being able to have more exposure, like we were talking about earlier, having access to cultures, combining that with language, it just helps you as an individual to grow. And so the fact that that's something that you're passionate about continuing to do that, and also want to be able to have that exposure for your children, bravo, or as I would say, bravo in France. We've got a lot of listeners and viewers from France as well. So,
cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of fun. So listen, so we've got to kind of get into the going along final 3. But the thing is, Karoline, I never ask any of our guests, and today you're our special guest, the going along final 3, unless you tell me that you're ready. So are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
I knew you were going to be ready. Let's do it. We're doing it. Here we go. So we started with you over in that beautiful place of Queens, New York. And I'd like to bring it back to this side of the pond, which is over here in Europe. And I would love for you to tell us, what is your favorite European city that you've either visited, Karoline, or is still on your bucket list to visit?
Okay, so I really loved Florence. And I found out, I did a 23andMe that my mom, I thought my whole life, like, I'm Brazilian, but I have quite a bit of Italian blood in me, and from the island or Capri. So, I was like, oh, do I look like those people? But I don't know. I'd have to go. So that's on the list. And there's also one other, because I speak Portuguese, there is a place in Portugal that has like the secret beach that not a lot of people know about. And I couldn't find the name, but there's a spot in Portugal that I really want to go to.
But you can only pick one though. Which one? What is your bet? What is your get? What is your help the going along family wants to know. They're like, which one is it going to be? Florence? Is it going to be where is it?
Sicily. It's not even any of them. Like,
it's not right. That's okay. We're gonna go with Sicily. It's all good. Question number 2. Check this out. So this has a lot to do with And it has a lot to do with the experiences that I've had with exposure to very successful people, right? And I consider you also to be someone who's very successful, Karoline, the things that you've done, the experiences that you have and have had, and also the impact that you're making on others. And hopefully you will agree with me. Like, one of the things that I've recognized that people that are very successful is that they, unlike most people, when they put together a plan, they put the plan together, they go out, they execute the plan, they get everything right the first time, which then allows them to go out and it allows them to get. Did I just say that? Sorry about that. Don't worry, Karoline. You look very, very scared. It's just a joke. It's an inside joke with me and the entire Going Long family.
Oh, okay.
Everybody, check out the video version. She's just looking like, oh my gosh. She's looking like, what? No. So here's the thing, Karoline. Nobody gets things right perfectly the first time or even the second time. And the reality is, those people that are successful, they get things wrong a lot more frequently, and they make a lot more mistakes than most people, or learning opportunities, or whatever you want to call it, right? So yeah, don't worry. 20 to 50 times more mistakes than most people. That's what successful people do. The first part was a joke. This is not a joke. This is really serious, because even though they make 20 to 50 times more mistakes than most people, the reality is those people that are successful, they do one thing very, very differently, and they do it every time. And that is, anytime that there is a relevant mistake or learning opportunity, call it however you want to call it, whenever that happens, every single time they stop, they learn from that mistake, and then they go out and they put different strategies, tactics, and actions in place to minimize the probability of that exact same thing happening again. So I don't want you to think about the mistake. I don't want you to think about the learning opportunity, but I really want you to think about the lesson that you took away from that mistake. And I'd love for you to share, what is the one lesson that you know that someone in the Going Long family needs to hear today to help them move forward faster?
Okay. This is a kind of challenging question, because I feel like there's so many things that you can learn just from one experience. So I mentioned to you guys that I do have 2 young children, and I will say this is kind of a vulnerable place for me, but basically I'm very big on fail fast and hard. So I got married very young, and I'm in the middle of not being married anymore. And so, my encouragement to people is that, like, sometimes, as you were saying, you're like, yes, people who are successful plan. And I planned. I had a whole dream of having 5 children and this big family, and like, this is how my life is going to be. And sometimes it doesn't go out, like, plans don't always happen. And I think it's important to have an understanding of, like, okay, it didn't go as planned, but this is what I did take away from it. And although it wasn't what I envisioned for my life, it has taught me that you can still fail and still move on from it and be successful in other areas of your life and still do the things that you want, but not necessarily, the way that you anticipated. It can happen in different ways. So yeah. Well, I appreciate that. So basically it is being able to understand that as you have your goals in life, things can change, and you continue to move towards that goal, even though the way that you get there may look different, may feel differently. It shouldn't detract you from what your end game is. So I appreciate that vulnerability. I appreciate you also helping others that are listening that sure need to hear that message as well, because sometimes you get stuck and you need to hear it from somebody else that has been along that path. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And this brings us to the very last question. And this is about feeding our mind, Karoline. And I would love for you to share with us, what is the one book that you would recommend to the Going Long family today? Okay. So if you have not already read The 12-Week Year, I would highly recommend that book. And it's by Brian Moran and Lexington. I can't remember the name. But that book will change the way that you view your year, right? Because just to give a little bit of context of this novel, this book, basically we think about life in a whole year, right? You work for a company for a year, and then they have goals, quarter 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Yep. And instead of looking at life from each quarter, you take and at quarter 4, what happens is we have these big goals, quarter 1 and quarter 4, we're like rushing to meet the deadline and to actually get those goals, right? So instead of looking at it like that, what if we set these high goals in the first 12 weeks and then see what happens? And I mean, he gives very specific detail, like a whole plan of like how you can go about doing that and becoming more efficient, because we as humans, we are humans and we're not necessarily the most efficient with our time. And so he gives us very detailed like ways to look at, okay, these are our goals and this is how we're going to achieve them. And this is, this is like a built-in system that you kind of have to follow. And the one key piece of it that I really love is accountability. And I think people underestimate that part. And that's why it's been great working with a mentor, is that they will hold you accountable, because we as humans naturally will just tell ourselves like, oh, it's okay, I didn't do X, Y, or Z for this week, but it's not, right? Like you set out to achieve a specific goal. So you need to make sure that you follow through.
Well, and that is one of the things. So it is a matter of being able to have accountability, but also that it sounds like, because I was in software sales for quite a long time, and it sounds very much like you wait until the very last like quarter of the year to get things done. But one of my philosophies was always try to do things as early as possible, because then that way I had more flex time, free time, and could plan better for the next year and be able to do things in a much more strategic fashion, I think is the way to think about it. So, and I go back and I'm thinking about the things that we talked about from the very beginning, and you being born in Brazil and having this growing up in a household that was had a juxtaposition from maybe different cultures, but had this wonderful inclusion of different language, different culture. You understood and had influences from not just parents, but grandparents. You found this exposure to real assets early on, which also helped to influence the way that you decided that you wanted to go and move towards the FIRE movement, as we talked about before. Very clearly that something that's really important to you is not just education, it's access, it's mentoring, and being able to not just take, but also to be able to give. And you're doing that through your podcast, and you're doing that through being here and sharing with me and the rest of the Going Long family. And I know that people here that are part of the Going Long family are thinking, how do I get in touch with Karoline? How can I find out more about her? So can you do me a favor? Can you help us understand what's the best way for the Going Long family to contact you, be in touch, or learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So my main platform right now is Instagram, but I am relatively active on LinkedIn too. So if they want to reach out to me on there, they can also shoot me an email at firstdealshow@gmail.com. That's the name of my podcast, is First Deal Show. And yeah, I would love to connect with the Going Long family. It's actually funny because I have a colleague or friend, his name is Marcus Long. And so I just thought it was so funny that like you have this show like Going Long Family, and his company is called A Long Legacy.
Yep. I know Marcus. So I know Marcus.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Marcus has been a guest. He's actually over on this side of the pond with me as well. So yeah.
Yes, yeah. He's in the
So we get shouts out to Marcus. There you go. Awesome. Which is fantastic. And so listen, so Going Long family, you've just heard it here from Karoline. She's made it really simple, easy to get in touch with her, find out more about what she's doing. She's got a wonderful podcast, The First Deal Show. And Karoline, I just want to thank you very much for investing your time with me and the entire Going Long family and giving us the opportunity to get to know more about you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Billy. I really appreciate the space and the opportunity to come here and hang out with you for a little bit. It was a lot of fun for me. So thanks so much for reaching out and like connecting. I really appreciate it.
All right. Sounds great. And Karoline, if you give me just like 15 seconds, I just want to wrap things up with the Going Long family and we'll be out of here. So listen, Going Long family, like she just made it really, really simple, shared great stories, helped you to understand, you can do any type of job, you can live anywhere, and you can continue to invest and make impact on others, continue to mentor, be mentored, and move towards your goals, regardless of what is happening in your life. So take today's conversation, share it with your friends, share it with your family, and make sure that you're talking about things. You can even be vulnerable. Karoline was very vulnerable with us today. That's what's going to help you to move forward faster. And so while you're doing all of that, I'll be here preparing and getting ready for the next conversation. So until then, go out and make it a great day. And thank you very much. Once again, today's conversation was sponsored by First Generation Capital Partners. If you want to find out more, go to firstgencp.com/invest.